Account of Marcus Mark Grady, extra on Spartacus. Filmed 1959, released 1960. When I signed up to be an extra on Spartacus, I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I was a struggling actor fresh off the bus from Iowa, eager to take any job that would pay me and get me on a real Hollywood set. The casting call was looking for able-bodied men willing to portray Roman soldiers or slaves. At 6 feet tall and reasonably fit, I figured I had a shot. What I didn't know was that I'd spend weeks covered in dirt, baking under the California sun, and getting shoved around in choreographed battle scenes. The first day I showed up on location, I was awestruck. The sheer scale of the production was unlike anything I'd imagined. We were filming at Universal Studios for some scenes, but much of the work was done out in the open expanses of Death Valley. The set was enormous, towering Roman columns, banners fluttering in the desert breeze, and massive wooden platforms built for gladiatorial fights. Everything looked so real that I felt like I'd actually stepped into ancient Rome. They assigned me to the Slave Rebellion group. We were the scrappy underdogs, unwashed, shirtless, and covered in fake grime that somehow always seemed to end up in my mouth. Wardrobe gave me a ragged tunic that barely stayed on my shoulders and a pair of sandals that rubbed my feet raw. The makeup team smeared me with dirt, and the effect was so convincing that I didn't recognize myself when I looked in the mirror. The star of the show, of course, was Kirk Douglas. Watching him on set was like attending a masterclass in acting. He wasn't just playing Spartacus, he was Spartacus. The way he carried himself, commanding, intense, yet approachable, made it clear why he was the star. Between takes, he'd sometimes chat with us extras, flashing that famous dimpled grin. One day, he walked over to a group of us sitting in the dirt and said, "You guys look worse off than the real slaves probably did." We all laughed, and for a moment, it felt like we weren't just extras but part of something bigger. One of the most grueling days was the filming of the battle scenes. I'd been cast as a slave soldier wielding a makeshift weapon, a wooden club that weighed far more than it looked. We were pitted against the Roman army extras, who got to wear shiny armor and carry actual, blunted, swords. Director Stanley Kubrick was meticulous to the point of madness. He'd make us redo entire sequences if even a single extra broke character. I remember one shot where we had to charge uphill toward the Roman lines, screaming and swinging our weapons. We must have done it at least 20 times in the sweltering heat, and by the end of the day, my legs felt like jelly. Kubrick himself was an enigma. He was young but had a presence that demanded respect. He rarely spoke directly to us extras, focusing instead on his lead actors and cinematographer. But when he did notice us, it was to give sharp, precise directions. "You're not just fighting," he said during one scene. "You're fighting for freedom. I want to see that desperation in your eyes." He had a way of making even us nameless background players feel essential to the story. One of the most memorable moments came during the iconic "I Am Spartacus" scene. Even though I wasn't one of the slaves seated close to Kirk Douglas, I could still feel the emotion radiating through the set. When each man stood and declared, "I am Spartacus," it sent chills down my spine. The sheer power of that moment, the defiance, the unity, it was electric. And even though we had to film it several times, it never lost its impact. The camaraderie among the extras was another highlight of the experience. We were all in it together, enduring long days and rough conditions. During breaks, we'd sit around swapping stories, sharing water, and joking about how none of us would ever want to be a real gladiator. One guy, a former wrestler from New Jersey, claimed he could take Kirk Douglas in a fight. We dared him to tell Kirk that. He never did. When the filming finally wrapped, I was exhausted but proud. I'd spent weeks pretending to be a rebellious slave, and though I never got a close-up, I knew I was part of something monumental. Seeing the movie in theaters was surreal. There I was, a tiny speck in a crowd of thousands, swinging my club in the background. But even more than that, I was part of a story that resonated with audiences around the world. Spartacus wasn't just a movie, it was a statement about freedom, dignity, and the human spirit. I never became a star, but I'll always have that summer on Spartacus. And whenever someone asks, "Have you ever worked with a legend?" I can smile and say, "I was there with Kirk Douglas." I was there for Spartacus.